Hello everybody, welcome back to our Sleep Granted ASMR channel.
Hello everybody.
Today we are going to be reading you another bedtime story. So we have this Fairy Tale Land book, and we are going to be reading you today Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel.
This is one of the stories that, I know, but I also don't know.
Well, you're going to learn it today.
I'm going to learn it today.
Today is the day that we learn the story.
Many years ago, the north of Europe was covered by a great pine forest, stretching out between the ocean in the west and the mountains in the east. At the foot of the mountains, hidden among the trees, was a little thatched cottage.
Here, a woodcutter lived with his two children, his son Hansel and his daughter Gretel.
Oh, that's why it's called Hansel and Gretel.
That's why it's called Hansel and Gretel.
Hansel was carefree and clever, with hair as dark as a starless sky and a laugh as loud as a blue jay's. Is that loud? I don't know if that's
Blue
loud.
jays are pretty loud.
Yeah, okay. Gretel was funny and fearless. Her eyes were as green as the pine needles, and her wit as sharp as their points. The woodcutter seemed as carefree as Hansel and as fearless as Gretel, but inside he was miserable. For months the rain had stopped falling and a famine was spreading across the land. There was a little food available, and what there was cost more than he could afford. Soon they had only one loaf of bread.
One night, Hansel and Gretel were so hungry that they couldn't sleep. They lay awake, talking about the food they would eat when the rain came again.
Imagine piles of gingerbread and candies, said Hansel.
And icing that tastes of almonds and roses, said Gretel. But then, downstairs, they heard the front door creak open and close, and voices murmuring.
Who would come to visit us so late at night? Whispered Gretel.
Let's find out, whispered Hansel.
Carefully, silently, they crept down the stairs, and there, in the kitchen, they saw their father talking to the wise old woman who lived on the other side of the forest.
Gretel shivered. When the wise woman looked you in the eye, she made you feel cold, even in the middle of summer. Her eyes were not blue or brown or green like other people's eyes. They were white like cold stones.
Tell me, my dear, the wise woman said to the woodcutter, why did you call me here so late at night? Famine is spreading across the land, and I cannot afford to feed my children, said the woodcutter. What can I do?
The wise woman smiled, an icy smile, something like, My eyes do not work well, she said, but when I close them, I can see into the future. She squeezed her eyes shut and said, there is only one thing you can do to survive. Tomorrow you must take your children to the forest and leave them there alone. Wow, talk about a villain. If you do as I say, all three of you will live. If you do not, you will starve to death.
I cannot do that, said the woodcutter. They will be eaten by wild animals. Trust me, said the wise woman. A kind old woman will take them in and look after them as if they were her own.
Maybe she's talking about herself.
Spoilers, hey, let's find out. The woodcutter could not bear the thought of abandoning his children, but the thought of them starving was far worse. I will do it, he said. I have no other choice.
Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. What are we going to do? Whispered Hansel. I do not trust the wise woman.
Nor do I, said Gretel. But I have an idea. When Father gives us our morning bread, let's not eat it. If we drop it on the ground as we walk into the forest, we can follow the breadcrumb path back home. Father will be so pleased to see us when we get there. He will be sure to let us stay. The next morning, the woodcutter gave Hansel and Gretel each a tiny piece of bread. Then he led them down twisting paths to the darkest part of the forest. As they walked, the children dropped breadcrumbs to mark the path back home.
Finally, they reached a small clearing. Wait here for me while I work, their father said. He built a fire to keep them warm, and then he said goodbye. I will be back before sunset, he said, and walked off into the woods. Without looking back, he did not want his children to see him cry. This is a really sad
I love
story.
it. Go to bed, children. Hansel and Gretel waited for a while by the warmth of the fire, safe in the knowledge that they would follow the breadcrumb path back home. But then came a fluttering all around them, and bird after bird swooped down from the trees to the forest floor. Peck, 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 peck. Oh no, Hansel, cried Gretel. The birds are eating the breadcrumbs.
They chased the birds away, but it was too late. They had eaten every last crumb. Birds, let me tell you.
Yeah, you know a lot about birds and eating your breadcrumbs. What are we going to do? Wailed Gretel.
Let's just choose a direction and start walking, said Hansel. I'm sure we'll find our way back home eventually.
Hansel and Gretel walked through the woods for hours, trying to ignore the rustlings and patterings and the howls of the wind. Or was it wolves?
I'm sure we came this way, said Hansel. It was definitely that way, said Gretel.
By nightfall, their feet were numb and they were faint with hunger. I don't think I can go any further, said Gretel. But then they came across the most beautiful house they had ever seen. The walls were made of pink icing, studded with candies, and the roof was made of gingerbread.
That sounds delicious.
It cannot be real, said Hansel. We must be dreaming.
But the house was real. Gretel broke a chunk from the wall and bit into it. It tasted of almonds and roses. Hansel broke off a piece of the roof, and then another, until a woman appeared at the window.
Gretel jumped back in fright. The woman's eyes were white and cold like stones. You must be hungry, my dears, said the woman. Come inside and I will cook you a proper meal for both of you.
Maybe the wise woman's prediction was right, said Hansel.
Hang on, said Gretel. But before she could stop him, he had walked into the cottage.
Gretel ran into the cottage after him, but the old woman had already grabbed Hansel and shoved him into a cage. What?
You gotta know this part of it.
It's awful.
Now you will never escape, she cackled. Serves you right for being greedy, boy. I am going to make you eat, and when you are fat enough, I will bake you into a pie and eat you. And then she turned to Gretel. I will not eat you, girl, she said. You are too skinny. You can help me cook and mop the floors. You will have nothing to eat but scraps and old bones.
The old woman made Gretel cook and clean and mop and chop late into the night. I have to save my brother, thought Gretel. But how? And then she had an idea. As soon as the old woman had fallen asleep, In front of the fire, Gretel passed a bone to Hansel. Through the bars of the cage, when she tries to check how fat you are, said Gretel, you stick this bone out of the cage and pretend it's your finger. She whispered, her eyesight is so bad she will not know the difference. If she does not think you're getting fatter, then maybe she won't eat you.
Every morning, Gretel had to bake bread and roast chicken and fry sausages for Hansel to eat. Every evening when the old woman checked Hansel's finger to see how fat he was, Hansel stuck the bone out of his cage instead. Every day the old woman cried out in frustration, "Why are you not getting fatter? You little bag of bones. I cannot wait much longer."
She is really aggressive.
I love it.
After a week and a day, the old woman ran out of patience. Gretel, make that pie dough, she said, lighting the fire in the stove. I am eating Hansel pie tonight.
But Gretel had a plan. I don't think Hansel will fit in the stove, she said. It is not big enough. Nonsense, said the old woman. Look, I can fit inside myself. She opened the stove door and stepped inside. And as soon as she did, Gretel slammed the door shut, trapping her inside.
A fatal mistake.
Literally.
Let me out, screamed the woman, but Gretel ignored her. Serves you right for being greedy, she said, and rushed to the cage and set Hansel free. Girl power.
Oh my God. The children filled their pockets with bread and cakes and apples and ran away from the cottage as fast as they could. But soon they were lost in the woods again. I am sure our cottage is this way, said Hansel.
I was trying to find our spot. It definitely was that way, said Gretel. As they were arguing about which path to take, they heard a voice calling, Hansel, Gretel, where are you?
The children could barely believe their eyes. Their father was running toward them through the trees. He hugged them tight as though he would never let them go. I am so sorry, he said. I should have never left you in the forest. I did come back for you, but when I came to the clearing, you had gone. I have spent all this time searching the forest to find you again. Can you ever forgive me?
Of course, said Hansel and Gretel.
And just then, splash, a drop of water fell from the sky, and then another, and another.
It's raining.
Rain, cried their father. Now the famine will be over.
They danced in the moonlight, their tears mingling with the raindrops. How poetic. That night, they ate a feast of bread and cakes and apples at home in their thatched cottage where they belonged. So that is the first story that we're going to be reading from this book. We will probably be bringing this book back again if you enjoyed these bedtime stories. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope that sleep was granted.
We will see you in the next video for another good night.
Good night, everybody. Good
Bye,
night.
everyone.